A large German shepherd sensed that something was seriously amiss in the woods behind her home, so she insisted that her owners follow her into the trees. What she showed them ended up saving 4 lives. Peter and Lucy followed Kyla, their black German shepherd, along the wildlife paths in the woods behind their home. There was tremendous urgency in the way she sniffed around, then ran ahead for a few yards and sniffed around again. She was looking for something. Kyla was a dog on a mission, and that was clear for all to see. If only Peter and Lucy could figure out what she was looking for, but all they could do was follow her in the hope that she would lead them to whatever it was that had been upsetting her so much since the night before. The previous evening, Keel and her 3 two-week-old puppies were settled in their nursery. The sun had set, and the household was quieting down for the night, but she was restless. She whimpered and came to nuzzle Peter where he sat reading a book. He had no idea what was bothering her, so he tried to calm her down some and walked her back to the nursery and her pops. When he left, Kyla stayed with her babies for a few minutes before getting up again. This time, she found Lucy in the kitchen, preparing dinner. She pushed against her and nuzzled her leg, trying to tell her something. However, Lucy couldn't figure out what was wrong either. She followed Kyla back to the nursery and settled down to take a look at the puppies, wondering if perhaps something was wrong with one of them. She picked up the puppies one by one, turned them around, and looked at them from all sides. They all seemed happy and healthy. They made sleepy little squeaks when she lifted them, and when she put them down again, they squirreled their way back in between their siblings. Kyla's restlessness wouldn't subside though, and the next morning was even worse. Kyla was positively panicked. She stomped around the breakfast table, whining and not leaving Peter or Lucy alone for a second. That's when Lucy suggested they take her for a walk. She'd been cooped up inside with the puppies for 2 weeks now, and maybe she was getting cabin fever. Peter pulled on a jacket, but when they opened the back door, Kyla streaked across the lawn in the backyard and disappeared into the woods. Somewhat perplexed at her behavior, Peter and Lucy followed, struggling to keep up with her. Once Kyla had entered the woods, she seemed less sure of herself. She stopped in her tracks and appeared to be listening for some kind of familiar sound. Then she dropped her nose to the ground again and sniffed around. And when she finally picked up the sound she'd been listening for, something only her doggy ears could hear, she raced ahead again with Peter and Lucy desperately trying not to lose her. Kyla dashed to her right and then veered onto a game path. She followed it for a couple of 100 yards, her nose pressed tightly to the ground, and then she stopped dead in her tracks and cocked her head again. Without warning, she sprinted into the trees. Peter and Lucy lost sight of her and started calling out her name, desperate for her to come back. But they received no response, not a sound or a bark. In the silence sent shivers down their spines. Somebody had reported some bear activity in the area a few days earlier. Peter and Lucy hadn't given that warning a second thought at the time, but they were now really concerned. They called again, but still heard nothing. They tried to follow Kyla into the woods, but the underbrush was vicious and their movements were slow and laborious. They looked around, but ended up hearing her before they spotted her. She was whining, but it wasn't the kind of sound she made when she was hurt or in trouble. It was the noise she made when she urgently tried to attract their attention. With renewed effort, Peter and Lucy broke free of the clingy underbrush and stepped into a small clearing among the trees. Kyla was seated next to a large cardboard box. It looked old, damp, and musty. Suspiciously, Lucy stepped forward, but Peter urged her not to open the box. There was no telling what was inside. But Kyla looked at her owner with pleading eyes. She nosed at the box, still whining, almost as if begging them to open it. That was enough for Lucy. She lifted the flaps and peered inside, and what she found made her gasp. She called out to Peter, telling him that all was okay. But the tone of her voice was now as urgent as Kyla's whimpering. Realizing that something was wrong, Peter hurried forward. Lucy held the box open so that he could see inside. Nestled in one corner were 4 newborn kittens. They were no larger than baby squirrels, and their eyes hadn't even opened yet. Constantly, both Peter and Lucy realized that these tiny creatures had no chance of surviving without a mother. Hand-rearing them was not an option. Neither of them had the time or the know-how. The best they could do, they decided, was to take them to an animal shelter and hope for the best. But finding someone who would help them survive and raise them even at an animal shelter was a really long shot. Meanwhile, Kyla was pacing around the box as if she was trying to tell them something again. In her so agitated, Peter suggested that they take the box with the kittens home and make a few calls. At the very least, they could find an animal shelter that would take the little ones, or perhaps one of their friends would be able to give them good advice. When Peter picked the box up, Kyla jumped around him as if he were her hero. For the first time since the previous night, she barked happily. She gave her owners a grateful look and bounded ahead, running in a straight line towards the edge of the woods. Back in the house, Peter and Lucy settled at the kitchen table, ready to phone around and look for help. They deposited the box with kittens in Kyla's nursery, hoping that the warm fur of the newborns would help them stay comfortable for the time being. 3 phone calls later, however, they were dispirited. They'd spoken to 2 shelters, and the reply from both of them was the same. The kittens were too tiny to survive. The best would be to euthanize them. That was something neither Peter nor Lucy would accept. They made another 3 calls, all with the same result. Frustrated beyond words, they discussed raising the kittens themselves. But this was a daunting task, and they weren't sure if they were even up to it. After all, they already had to deal with Kyla's puppies. Speaking of, Peter got up to check on them and see if they were warming up to the kittens. When he reappeared in the kitchen, his eyes were big, and he had a startled look on his face. He beckoned for Lucy to follow him and held his finger to his lips. Quiet as a church mouse, Lucy slipped in behind him and followed him into the nursery. When they peeked around the door, they saw something they couldn't believe was possible. Kyla stood with her head over the edge of the cardboard box. Gently and slowly, just like a mother, she lifted a kitten with her mouth, walked over to her puppies, and put the cat down among them. She went back to the box and repeated the exercise another 3 times until all 4 kittens were intermingled with her own litter. Then, carefully and somewhat laboriously, she lay down. With her paw, she pulled the first kitten closer and started licking it. Then, she nuzzled it towards her belly. Instinctively, the kitten started drinking her milk. When Kyla was satisfied, she started on the next kitten and wouldn't let up until it was drinking too. She repeated the process with all the cats. With only 3 puppies of her own, she had more than enough milk to rear the kittens. It was instantly clear that she had accepted them as her own and that they had accepted her as their mother. Peter and Lucy were in tears and recognized that what they were looking at was pure motherly love. Fast forward 1 month, the kittens and puppies had all opened their eyes. They were getting more active by the day, but none of them seemed to realize the difference between them and their siblings. And Kyla was the happiest mother on this side of the Georgia woods. What a beautiful ending. Did you know that kittens can nurse from dogs? Would you have tried to save the cats too? Thank you for watching this video, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.